Good afternoon and welcome to S24 Insight. A people can lose land and still rebuild. They can lose money and still recover. But when a people lose memory, they begin to lose themselves. Today we ask a difficult question. Who decides what is worth preserving? Is it elders, government, museums, families, filmmakers, historians, communities, or the people whose lives carry the culture every day? From languages and festivals to architecture, oral history, food, dress, music, faith traditions, family systems, and sacred places, it's not just all about heritage. It's not about the past. It's a whole community, a whole world. It is identity under protection. Joining me to discuss this very important issue is John Costa, S24's Director of Strategy, Research, and Global Partnerships, a documentarian, storyteller, and a teacher as well. In fact, a veteran and military officer, I believe, or sergeant, if that's correct. Welcome to S24 Insight, and let's dive into this properly.
Thank you.
So when we talk about heritage, what are we actually talking about from your perspective as somebody that is very keen in that segment or niche of our life?
I mean, for me, I think it's very much about what it is to you personally. So as someone who's from the East End of London, I'm 60 years old, there's a Cockney heritage there that I have from coming from that part of the world. There's research I'm doing about 30 members of my family that have served in the military in the last 120 years. And then there's sort of today, what we're doing today, what are we keeping? If all of our phones have our photos stored, if we lose our phone, we lose all of our photography. So unless we print our pictures out, who are we going to show those photos to in the past? And as a youngster, you can remember going to maybe a grandparent and there was a box that you got out and you had everybody's photos. If that doesn't exist because everything's digital or it's in the cloud, if we have any kind of issues at all when it comes to the storage of those things, we're going to lose that physical ability to be able to recall any of those events.
And that's very genuine. You mentioned something key. When we're growing up, there's always photo albums where you find every family member memory preserved there. So in your view, is heritage only monuments, museums, palaces, and festivals? Or is it also language, memory, values, food, sound, dress, family structure, and everyday life?
I think it's all of those things. Mm-hmm. I think there's an industry, obviously, that's grown up through academia and through, public institutions when it comes to museums and preserving things in churches, maybe places of worship. But for individual people themselves, it's more about what it means to you. It might be a particular item of clothing that you were given when you were a baby. It might be your christening cup. It might be a book that you got given as a prize when you were at school. And if we start thinking about all of those things together, what happens then is everybody has the ability to tell that story from their own perspective. So when you walk into a museum and people say, I'm not seeing myself, I'm not seeing my culture, my people, particularly from a sort of colonial perspective, being represented, then I think it's the individual and what's held in families under the bed, in the back of a cupboard, are the things that we need to give some value to, because they're able to not change the narrative, they're able to add to the narrative.
Mm-hmm. So why do you think societies often preserve buildings more carefully than the stories of the people who lived in them?
It's a fascinating question, and I think it's one that shapes the heritage sector, culture sector, museum sector quite a lot, particularly when we're looking at decolonising particular things. I mean, it's well known now that most of Africa's heritage that was taken is actually on display in Global North museums. Why are we even having conversations about whether they should be returned? They should be returned because if those countries that were colonised are now independent and they've got their own museum sectors and they've got national museums and libraries, why shouldn't they be returned to help them to shape and also control and reimagine, maybe kind of repurpose some of those stories that for a long time have only been told about them as individuals that were colonised? Give them the information back and the items back that they can actually put into their curriculum to tell children, particularly young people, and speak to the older generation that maybe has memories of colonial times 60, 70 years ago, that this is what it was, but this is why we're independent. And, for example, a Federal Republic of Nigeria, it's gone through various versions. It's gone through a Biafran civil war. And here it is, in 2026 presidential election. All of these things, they're all played out by politicians and people in the media. We're not necessarily giving individuals and citizens ownership of being able to know and understand what actually happened from families' perspectives.
So what is the difference between culture as performance and culture as lived memory?
I think culture as performance is more about the kind of the stereotyping of a particular people. Some of the tribes may be here. The north will have a view of the south, and the south will have a view of the southeast. But then again, that's the same in the UK. People from southeast, with London, will view the Welsh or the Scottish or the Irish, or maybe people from Liverpool, and even within London, people from the East End themselves, in a particular way of preserving it. And if we don't allow people to shape that narrative, it gets left to popular culture. So in a movie or a particular stage play maybe, or a book or a newspaper article, suddenly if there's nothing to counter that, if you've not got that kind of the evidence or the skills to be able to respond to that, then what happens is it becomes a lazy stereotype. So I think it's really important that we have that conversation about why do we stereotype certain people from the world, how they are. And the only way you can do that is through education and intergenerational learning when it comes to sharing of items. We're very good at sharing food as cultures. If we got together and shared an item from your childhood or shared an item from a wedding ceremony that you have in your particular culture, we suddenly start to understand that, well, if we're all sharing items from our different cultures about getting married, then actually partnerships and family are important to all of us. So suddenly we start to reclaim some of the sort of the ungoverned spaces when it comes to politics, which are talking about why people are different. We turn around and say, well, actually, we're not that different, really.
That's really important, and because culture, I think, should be seen as a lived memory. You tell people this is what it was from the perspective of the true person that lived it, not the stereotypes that we see all around. And when does tradition becomes a source of strength, and when can it become a prison?
I think it's very much when it's left to someone else to set the agenda for you. This is really one of the challenges between sort of the global north and the global south, is the fact that the global north's version of events is normally the stronger, is the one that won, the one that colonised, the one that dominated. And the people from the global south, it's about reclaiming tradition. It's really interesting. I'm just on the board of jurors for the Cardiff Kaduna International Film Festival, and one of the submissions there was talking about colonial times coming with Christianity, and how are we going to reclaim some of those tribal traditions that we had beforehand? Where's the balance? If we're still Christians now and we're still believing in God and Jesus and stuff like that, where are the traditions from those people that converted to Christianity? Now, they might be in museums or they might be held in local folk centres and stuff like that, but it needs to be valued, because it seems to be very much that from a colonial time, when you suddenly convert to Christianity, anything before that is old-fashioned. And that was what was interesting about talking to the Emir with the book and the compendium that he was compiling and showing to students, is the fact that you might know the Emir and now, and how long it's been going on, and he's been in power for 6 years and the predecessor 45 years. But before that, before it became a British colony, and long before that, there were various empires and stuff. And I just think it helps people to make sense of who they are today, which can be very easily lost in a 24/7 white noise, social media, popular culture. TikTok can teach you everything you need to know about history. Suddenly, to actually touch items and look at old black and white photos, if you take the time, you can start to reclaim the past for yourself from your perspective.
That's really interesting. And this topic is never neutral when you're talking about it. What survives often depends on who has power, who has money, who writes history, and who is ignoring it. So on this part, I think we should focus on who gets to decide what is preserved. In your opinion, who should decide what is worth preserving?
I think if you are talking to, for example, the National Archive in Nigeria, then I'd like to think it was suitably qualified people with the right kind of way of archiving and preserving material that's about the national heritage going back way beyond living memory. But I think we also need to be looking at reclaiming the past from an individual citizen of Nigeria, when you're looking at what items do you have in your family collection that can preserve who you are and the part that you play. Now, obviously, there's lots of people that are, are exploited. They might be from a particular group that's been persecuted or been through something like the Biafran Civil War, for example. But we need to understand that there might have been a winner and a loser, but have we really dealt with a lot of the unsettling, maybe, way that people came up with the reason why they thought they should fight? And until you understand both sides of that argument, I don't think as a country you can never really heal and move forward, because I think, civil war, out of all versions of war, I mean, all war's terrible, but civil wars tend to be the ones that are the hardest to recover from. It still dominates America, it will still dominate other countries like in, the former Yugoslavia, because what you've got there, when it's a civil war, it's about differences within people that you can put a band-aid over that you're a federal republic of Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And even the social media story the other day about the President Tinubu decided they was going to call it United States of Nigeria, and the reaction that they got from online, a lot of that will come from still open wounds, conversations that have not really healed over the last 60 years from maybe the Biafran War, that having projects that bring people together from a heritage and culture and shared traditions perspective, particularly intergenerational, older people with explaining to the younger generation that might say that on TikTok, but actually these items demonstrate that. And I'm a great believer, as someone who's got my own museum, that as soon as you get money out and maps and things like that, it suddenly gives people a focus to think about and suddenly make reasoning behind, rather than just a 60-second TikTok, actually sitting down for a conversation and going through something and looking maybe at the Emir's compendium. You suddenly realise that you're a small cog and you're not as important as you think you are, but you are, because you're part of something that's bigger than you, and we need to re-own that, I think.
I think that narrative re-owning is very key. You've mentioned a few very important things and issues at the same time. Sometimes there's a difference between what the government preserve officially and what the people remember. There was a conversation between myself, yourself, and Mr. Edmond some times ago, and we're relieving or talking about the Biafran War, the northern perspective, the southern perspective, etc. So what do you think we should do to be able to remove the difference? Because it's not okay for the people that lived the memory to say this is what actually transpired, and then the government preserves something differently. That puts more, I think, gap in the people. For a multi-ethnic group like Nigeria, if we don't deal with that precisely, it means any small crack will all be on the defensive and sometimes even kill each other.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. The smallest crack can start the biggest chasm when it comes to people, because about who decides what's important, who decides what's worth remembering, and particularly if you're part of the side that still feels aggrieved, or you feel like you've lost, if there's a winner and a loser in these occasions. And so I think that, from a federal government perspective, it's about making sure that with the new National Archive or the new National Library that's under construction at the moment, that everybody is consulted and is able to contribute something. Because even if it's not quite what you want, the fact that you were asked and it's got a little bit about you in it, I think is really important. It's when you get something like that that's seen as a national symbol, particularly if it's sold in the way that it's about a unifying symbol, and then you're not represented, that can be a source of upset for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But again, I think we're the same in the UK. We really don't value teachers, we don't value educators, we don't value informal education, people that have the ability to influence young people because they work with young people. So I'm talking about youth service, or the football coach. Now, if the football coach has the way, or a sports coach has a way of talking about Nigeria's sporting success on a global stage, suddenly young people start to realise that it's not just about Nigerian football and playing in big tournaments, but suddenly start thinking about the value and the contribution of sport towards health, representing Nigeria in a positive way internationally, the Olympics, the Commonwealth Games. So there's lots of ways that we can use these things as a vehicle for having conversations, and then it's about write something down, create something. If you're into poetry, write it. If you like painting, paint something. It's not about doing it in a certain way, and this is what really gets me going when I talk about these kind of things, about whose responsibility is it to preserve memory. It's everybody's, but you should only preserve it in your way, what's ever best to you. If that's printing off digital photos, fantastic. If it's printing off digital photographs and putting them in a book, so there's a 2026 version of what an old photo album is, then that's fine. You've just got to make a decision that, you know, we're not here for very long, but did we do something? And, you know, did we make an impact? And did we contribute? And if your answer is yes, then it's for you to do that and make that part of the collective memory, I think.
Oh, great. In what ways do you think class, gender, colonial history, religion, ethnicity, and political power shape what enters our archive generally?
Absolutely dominates it. And I think, particularly where I'm from in the UK, I had a conversation about how we could improve one of our local social history museums that was going through quite a lot of turmoil at the time when it came to staffing and funding. And I started talking about someone who'd got a whole collection that they'd inherited from their aunt, where she'd made notes on everything. She collected postcards, she wrote loads of letters, and it was a real social history of her street and the people she knew. And they said to me that it was like, you know, house clearance. They weren't interested. But if I'd have bought it from a website as a collector, then it had a value. But because it came through me, through someone's house, that they said, can you clear my house? And someone said, oh, this is important. It was house clearance. And so we've got this cultural, intellectual snobbery that comes about from who gets to decide who we are. And I think it's really important that the conversations that we have on the street, in our community settings, should be about these are the things that are important to the people, and how do we then create projects. So, for example, here at S24, how do we create a documentary series about who gets to keep those memories that can then be used as a way of, you know, engaging in conversations with academia and with business and with politicians to turn around and advocate for your person out on the street, that they can see themselves in the National Library or a National Archive or in collective memory.
Can archive itself become a form of power for people?
Absolutely, because whoever controls the past controls today. And whoever controls today controls the future. And I think I've got that correct. But it's one of those things, isn't it, that if you've got the access to any of those materials, then you can pretty much shape and rewrite the past. And I think for me, in my own archive back in the UK, I'll have several copies of travel guides, for example, and people say to me, why have you got several copies? Surely they're the same. And you go, yeah, the hotels and the restaurants might change, but I get these travel guides for the history section, because it's interesting that you can go through them and see how the history section in a travel guide is written, is how that country sees itself at that particular time. And you might have coups, military governments, you might have changes in power, you might have civil wars. And so when you actually monitor that, you can realise that something from 1992 that is in print can't be changed. As soon as something goes into an archive that's owned by someone else, they have the ability to remove it, redact it, or change what it is. But you can still be the custodian of what that was at that particular moment, particularly if it impacted your family, and you can lay down a photograph about it or show a film.
Oh, so what should ethical preservation look like?
I think ethical preservation should look like that it's spoken to people that are on both sides of a particular issue. Now that can be on both sides of the divide, because it will say something like the Civil War, but then also it can be about that, you know, have we spoken to everybody that was actually present at that moment and who was impacted? The biggest challenge is the people that were impacted the most were probably the people that lost everything. So therefore, they don't actually have anything to prove that they were even there. And so I think we have to collectively work together across multiple groups of people to make sure that we're able to share information. And that for me really is, in my archive, I have 120 countries of the Global South, and I very rarely collect anything from the Global North. I try and get it from the Global South, because it just means that the people that affected the most were the ones that had a view of what happened very different from the people that came and actually came and did what they did. So I think that's, you know, that's used as context. This is really what happened and should be able to shape that narrative.
That's really genuine. And I think we should always allow people to tell their stories in their lens. People with the lived experience, it's sort of give a balance than just For instance, I wouldn't trust to see something that is archived in the UK about maybe northern Nigeria in a way, because it will feel like that's not the original context for me.
Yeah.
So I always like that the original people talk about their story.
And the original content that's in that archive in the Global North was never about representing your opinion on what was going on at the time. It was always someone's interpretation of what they saw.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of that is still toxically racist.
It is. Now let's bring the camera into the conversation, because film does not only record heritage, sometimes it defines the what the future generations will see. And let's talk about the camera briefly and the impacts of the camera on maybe our history, etc. As a documentarian, in what ways do you approach filming culture without turning people into exhibitions?
Oh, what a great question. It's one of those things that I think that is debated quite a lot when it comes to, even today in 2026, the role of debated quite a lot when it comes to, even today in 2026, the role of the camera as a maker of film, film footage, visual footage, or taking photographs of people, that are in situations around sort of, are you exploiting them? Should you ask them? Should you ask permission? If you're taking someone and you're putting them on the front of a magazine like National Geographic, should they be paid? Should they be compensated? Are you taking photographs of their misery? So I think actually the camera is one of those things where it can be the great democratizer, but it also can be very much around fixing in time a particular person or a particular image that then is actually part of the perpetuating of a stereotype. So there's some very well-known images that we've got taken maybe in in poverty times or in the American Depression that pretty much benchmarked people from that area about how they were at that time, and they were never compensated. They were never asked permission if it was okay for them to be taken. And you can see now, even today, how the role of the camera for taking photographs and making films are used to reinforce stereotypes about people from certain places, but are also being used from a solutions journalism perspective to be provided or given back to those people that have lost everything to actually document who they are. So we need to be careful that we're not giving cameras and photographing people in internally displaced persons camps, for example, that are about capturing how terrible it is, but actually how innovative, how willing to return to where they are. I was having a conversation with someone about the situation with herdsmen here and land and smallholders being in IDP camps, and a lot of that was about the willingness to return, but they have to return when it's safe for them, not when someone says it's safe, when it is actually safe. But are we documenting that experience and sharing it in the right way, rather than just NGOs using it for reports? Are we explaining to people that actually everybody here could be economically active? Nobody wants to be kept in an IDP camp. Could we be using content in a much better way to maybe show politicians, force their hand to do something about the insecurity because it's impacting maybe 500,000 people?
I think that brings back a kind of memory for me. Maybe I was a child, but you remember the 1993 iconic picture of a child that was eaten by a vulture and it became something. What does that speak to modern days, for instance? There is a problem now that maybe when there is an accident or there is maybe crisis, when people are supposed to maybe give immediate aid or support to people, they are more fixated on taking pictures or video in the name of preservation. What do you make of that?
Well, I think anybody that feels that they need to take a photo or video a situation rather than helping the people in that situation who need help, if they're able to help, is probably not a very nice person to start with. I think that particular picture that you're talking about there, that Kevin Carter, the South African photographer, he was taking photographs in the camp and actually wandered away from the situation because of what was going on, and came across this child with that vulture that was waiting, and he actually committed suicide after that. I mean, I think he won the Pulitzer Prize, and I think that weighed on him quite heavily. And I think I've got an archive that I've just been given before I came for my conflict memory education centre from a very famous American war journalist, photographer called Jim Hooper, and he's got some photos in there from Sudan, from Sierra Leone, from various conflicts in Africa, Bosnia and stuff. And what's interesting when you look at his, none of it's about war fighting. There's no one shooting anything. I've been through them all the slides, all the negatives, all the photographs, everything's been printed out. And they're all photographs of who was there, what was going on, refugees, the impact on people. There was no war fighting, and that says a lot to me about that particular person, because he was there to capture and document what was going on rather than to capture the bang bang, they call it, of what the situation was.
So what must be done before recording elders, traditional leaders, families, artisans or communities for archive purposes?
I think one is permission. I think that a lot of people seem to think now that it's perfectly acceptable to push a camera in someone's face out on the street. And so street photography has captured some many amazing images, but also has put people in the situation where, you know, didn't necessarily want to be documented. And so when you're working with young people particularly, and they want to document something, they still bring that very kind of quick social media, TikTok, Instagram reels to it, which is great, but at the same time but did you ask before you did it? And because what it does, it allows you to take that moment when you ask someone for maybe permission or have a conversation about why are you doing that? Are you okay for me to take that photograph? I'd like to preserve what you're doing. What you're actually doing is you're connecting with that person. And for the first time probably, rather than being just a subject of someone taking photographs, you actually see them. And I think that, you know, we look but we don't see. You know, we listen but we don't hear. And, you know, I think it's very true at the moment when we live in a 24/7 media white noise culture, that what happens is when you've finished watching something with whatever your attention span is, do you actually have the ability to recall any of it and actually have any empathy for anybody that was in it? And more we really struggle with that. So just because the news covers it, it doesn't mean that anybody's doing anything about it. And I think one of the things that we try to do here at S24 with our new doc unit and the approach that we try to take, as you well know, is the fact that it's about building context and understanding behind the stories. It's not just about telling someone that it happened, but it's like, why? Where did it come from? What was the impact? Could it happen again? What could we do differently? And this is really where building solutions journalism has a real impact.
And finally, before we go to rapid fire and call it a day, if a community wants to begin preserving its heritage today, where should it start from? Very briefly.
I think it's about getting a small group of people together and say, you know, who are we? What do we want to do? And why is it important? And then what you'll find is someone else might have done something. Can you build on that? It's not about replacing that. I always say to people, it's about building on what's being done. What you then do is no one's doing it better than anybody else, and there's no right or wrong way. It's more about the mere fact that you're looking to do something means you're already 90% of the way there. It's getting people together and then getting people just to share something that's important to them. It doesn't matter what it is, you know, whether it's brand new, really old, whether it's expensive. It's just contribute what you can get, and before you know, a very small group of people in the community are starting to own and shape a narrative that for the first time is about them rather than what the society thinks of them, because we leave it to the media to shape people.
Yes, thank you so much. And that will be all. Let's quickly do a rapid fire before we call it a wrap. Short answers, yes or no, or just a brief sentence. Culture or history?
Culture.
Archive or memory?
Memory.
Elders or youth?
Elders.
Preservation or reinvention?
Preservation.
Film or written record?
Written record.
Museum or community archive?
Community archive.
Language or architecture?
Language.
One tradition we must document urgently?
Oh, that's a good question. Read that again.
One tradition we must document urgently.
Oh, what? Storytelling.
Okay. One mistake heritage storytellers must avoid?
Not talking to the people that were there at the time.
Okay, and finally, complete this. A people without memory
won't exist in the future.
Thank you so much, John Costa, for joining us on this edition. It's been really educating for me as well, because when we talk about things like this, you go back memory lane and think about things that transpired in the past, etc. And if we need to go back to what make things easier for people to remember or relay what was there in the past, etc., we would see that today's conversation reminds us that heritage is not nostalgia, right? It is survival. It is the bridge between what shaped us and what can still guide us. But memory does not preserve itself. Someone must record it in the most appropriate manner. Someone must protect it. Someone must challenge what is forgotten and ask who was left out. If future generations search for us, what evidence will they even find that we understood who we were or not? I'll leave our audience with that. I am Halima Abdulrauf, and this is S24 Insight. Bye for now.